Well, good morning, everybody. Let's give a shout out to Future Proof and all the good folks who put this conference together. So good so far. I am delighted to be here. I'm the editor-in-chief of Investopedia. Real honor to be at this conference, the inaugural, and I'm very excited about this conversation. So I'm joined by Soraya Darabi. She's the co-founder and general partner of Trail Mix Ventures. They have some really cool portfolio companies, and she's got her finger all over this space. So I want to get into the temperature right now in PE firms, in venture capital firms. What's it like right now? What are people feeling? Are they backing out? Are they leaning in? What are you noticing?
Well, it's a great question to start with, and I like that we begin with the macro. First differentiation, as everyone in this audience knows, there's a big difference between venture and PE, although the two asset classes are starting to conflate a bit more. I happen to be an early stage investor, so just for context, TMV has about 100 million under management. That'll triple in the next year. We invest in pre-seed, seed, and Series A startups. So for folks who aren't as familiar with venture capital, that tends to be valuations sub 50 million. For those of us at the earliest stage of the riskiest asset class, as we like to say, things are still relatively calm and good. Where we're seeing a lot of volatility and a lot of change is where PE and growth VC sit in higher valuations, pre-IPO market, because they're more subject to the volatility of the public markets, which of course are prepping for an inevitable recession. And when that recession hits, I will not be able to tell you because I wouldn't be on stage right now if I knew, but it is coming. We all know it's coming. And so the VC asset class and the PE asset class, if we're talking traditional VC, they're pulling back a little bit, but depending on where you sit in the spectrum, it's really not as terrible for folks in my shoes. We're focused now on getting our portfolio companies 2 years of runway to prepare them for that inevitable storm. But otherwise, we're not having to mark down our books because our valuations are relatively sensible compared to the larger scheme.
Right, you come in early, so you have the opportunity, you have the upside, but you're also taking the biggest risk there. So in the last year, you've seen all this coming. You follow the trends. You follow what's happening in the economy and the broader trends. Has your approach to funding and evaluating companies changed a little bit? Have you become a little bit more sensitive one way or the other?
Slightly so, but not largely. So as an example, a classic seed round that my firm would lead would be a $4 million seed round on a $15 million post-money valuation. And 15 million post-money valuation and a 4 million seed round would have seemed large about 10 years ago when I was a founder for the first time. And now it seems relatively normal, although valuations are dropping by about 20% above the board. And so in Q4 this year, we're going to see more seed valuations and more seed financings look more like 3 on 12. There's a haircut, but it's slight. It's nothing like what we're seeing in the public markets for tech companies, which are taking a 50 to 80% dip because they were trading on obscene multiples, in my opinion, that were just unhealthy, and a reckoning was over times.
Right. So, and I guess there are some companies where you're like, we're actually not going to give you that haircut. We believe, and you may lean in a little bit more. There are opportunities there where you're like, no discount here. We're all in.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we invest in founders first. Always have, always will. We were lucky to be named Inc. Magazine's most VC-friendly firm last year, and that's an honor that we stand by. And so what we look for are exceptional founders, typically repeat. They've had demonstrable success or a front row seat to success that can prove they're subject matter experts in their domain. If we find that founder, we're a little bit less, risk sensitive.
Yep. Trail Mix, you in particular, you're looking into healthcare, you're looking into future of work, you're looking into ed tech. All three super ripe for disruption. A lot of them have been disrupted over the past couple of years. What excites you right now? What ideas are you looking at? What portfolio companies do you have in the mix right now where you're like, that is right where it needs to be? What's getting you going?
Well, you named 3 of our 5 sectors. The other 2 are mobility and supply chain and tech-enabled sustainable solutions. Across the board, we're an impact fund. We care about ESG. It's very timely. We're talking about that a lot today and tomorrow. The examples of companies that we found from their earliest include Kindbody, a women's health company focused on egg and embryo preservation. We read the census report for 2010 showing that women were delaying childbirth. I'm very pregnant on stage today. I'm an example of it. I'm in my late 30s. And they were focused more, thank you. They were focused more on ways in which affordably you could family plan with their partners or by themselves. And so we invested in one of the first affordable ways to create eggs and embryos. And that company is a unicorn multiple times over. We are very excited by Cityblock Health and the health sector as well. We invested very early on. It's premium healthcare, omni-channel for folks who are on Medicaid or Medicare, but mostly Medicaid. It's nationwide. Again, we met the founders pre-launch. They're worth over $6 billion today. So health was accelerated during COVID for obvious reasons, and we haven't had to create valuation dips at any of those companies. If anything, they're growing. Both of them are preparing, I believe, for IPOs in the future. And then in the tech-enabled sustainable solutions front, not to just talk up my book, but we were among the earliest pre-seed investors in a company called Ridwell. Ridwell is privatized recycling. We came into this company pre-launch at a $5 million valuation, just to give you a sense. With a $500K investment, that's 10% of the business, easy math. And they're worth much, much more than that now, have funding from some of the best investors in the world, Midas list investors. And really what they're doing is dead simple. They're making it easier for you to recycle more than paper or plastic, and to upcycle things in your home that you'd like to see going elsewhere, either because you're philanthropic, or because you want spring cleaning, or because you're just tired of not knowing where to put your kids' old eyeglasses and school books. And that actually is an innovation in and of itself. So when we look at a great investment, it starts with the founder, it starts with the TAM, obviously, how large is the addressable market, and then we whittle it down to, are they first to market, and can they win this market? If we figure out the answers to those 4 questions, we're gold.
Well, you talked about investing in founders first, so that's the belief in people. That's the belief in management. You like people who have shown the track record before. What are the other characteristics of very successful founders that you pick up on right away when you meet somebody?
Well, we can detect hubris from a mile away. And we don't like overly confident folks, because we've found, and this is data driven, it's not subjective, we found the founders that ask the best questions, who listen more than they speak, who have really colorful things to say, great listeners, they tend to be the most thoughtful leaders, the ones who aren't booted out of their companies and are there to last. We really do like people that have domain expertise. It seems dead simple, but sometimes the most obvious things are the best investing advice. You know, I like to see doctors like Dr. Robin Berzin of Parsley Health, one of our founders, start a healthcare company. Dr. Toyana Jai of Cityblock is the CEO of Cityblock. There's a reason why a doctor might start something in the healthcare space, for instance. It's because they understand a gap that no one else has seen. So we look for that across mobility, across ed tech, all of the 5 pillars in which we invest.
And when you fund, where is your funding coming from? Obviously, you have a pool of capital that you've raised. You have other investors that have contributed, and you've had some success. So when you're making that allocation, where's the pool, and how are you making that decision?
We're backed by institutions. We're backed by a lot of RIAs. Some of them are here today. Want to thank Barry, for instance, of RWN, for inviting me to speak. We're backed by banks like Bank of America, Synchrony Bank, Rothschild Bank, JP Morgan Bank. So classic institutional investors, but that's only 50% of our AUM. And the other half are high net worth individuals, typically tech founders that have had a tremendous exit, that recognize that we have a really good look into their sector or their space, and they want to get in at the ground floor. A lot of the institutional investors right now in particular are pulling back a bit, and it makes sense why. I mean, as markets cut valuations, it means they're over allocated to various asset classes. And so they might not be as excited by, for instance, you know, risky, as you put it, or early stage investing. But historically, only 40% of institutional capital has gone to emerging managers. Actually, Forbes posted that today in one of their articles. And when you look inversely at the best returns across all venture capital, it's from new managers, fund managers on funds 1 through 5. And so if you really want to capture that alpha, that great exposure, you need to diversify your allocation into venture, and it means meeting more folks like me. And so some RIAs that we work with include Crescendo and Cardea and LCP and quite a few.
Can I push on that a little bit more? Since we have a lot of RIAs here and folks in and around this space, how do they approach you, or how do you approach them if they want to get involved and have their clients participate? How does that model work?
I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's junior folks in the firm who are on Twitter, who are on LinkedIn, and their job is to find fund managers like myself that have a few funds under their belt. We have great returns, and so we're proven, but we're not so institutionalized that it's impossible to get into our fund. And they'll write to my team cold. Honestly, that's how we found the RIA who anchored our last fund, was through cold outreach. Sometimes it's at a conference like this, sometimes folks who listen to Barry's podcast, where I was lucky enough to be a guest. I mean, it's a myriad of ways, but I think good old-fashioned networking.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Yeah. So for their clients, and I'm a client of an RIA, if I want that exposure, I'll ask them for that, or is that just And does it depend on the IRA? It's just a part of their offering.
It's a marketplace. So obviously funds like mine are pitching, and there's never been more venture capital funds in market than there is today. I see that as a good thing. The market's not saturated. It's not zero sum. There's a lot of abundance to be captured. But on the other side of the marketplace are your clients. And a lot of times the clients will say, this is a profile we're looking for. I'd say the classic RIA client who finds us proactively knows of our work from our thought leadership that we publish, or they say something that's honestly tribal. I like that you're a diverse team. You invest in diverse founders. I like that you're a woman, and my partner happens to be a woman too. There's a great wealth transfer happening. I was talking to Neela this morning. She's the co-CFO of Abacus, and she was saying, for the first time in history, this great wealth transfer is happening, and a lot of their clients are demanding ESG in their portfolio. We did not see that when we got started a little under a decade ago, and most certainly we're seeing that now.
Let's talk about ESG for a sec, a little off topic for what we were discussing earlier, but it's getting a little bit of some bad headline risk because there's been a lot of greenwashing in the industry. There's been a lot of companies that tout that they're doing right but actually don't.
Right.
And then there's just a lot of mystery around it. What's your approach to it? How do you define it within your firm? And when you go looking for portfolio companies, what's the prism in which you're looking at them?
Okay, so there's two answers to this question. I'll be as efficient as possible. The first is that we say that we're indie rock VC. We're not your grandfather's ESG sleeve. I have made the mistake of investing in a classic bank sleeve, and it did not outperform the S&P, and that's not what you want. For us, our portfolio, by and large, is in the top quartile, according to Cambridge Associates, in terms of best performing funds, and we happen to invest in impact. That's the way we frame it. Best performing data that happens to be purpose driven. I think that part of the problem is that the way a BlackRock might define ESG is different from how a PE manager might define ESG, and a lot of people are conveniently defining it in a way that sort of fits their book. We don't take that approach. So for us, we invest in people, purpose, profit, but not necessarily in that order, triple bottom line. And we align our goals against the UN SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. We measure that specifically with a rubric called IRIS Plus, for those of you in the industry who are familiar. And we are mandated by some of our foundational LPs to report on impact on an annualized basis. And so, my firm is small. There's 10 of us. As we grow, we'll publish this literature. But to give you two examples, we were early investors in a company called Figs, the first company in history to have 2 female co-founders take that business public. We came in at the Series A.
These are the scrubs for people in the medical industry.
As an example, an LA-based company that we're very proud to have backed from the earliest. But, a company like that at a $15 million valuation to where they went public at over $6 billion at the peak is a great outcome for anyone who's lucky enough to get in at the front door. I'm not saying that was my particular exit, but these are opportunities that we're seeing that others are missing for various reasons. And I would argue that 2 women founders have some unconscious bias to deal with. We are lucky enough to back one of the only companies in the world to be helmed by, she's not African American, she's African founder, who happens to also be the CEO of the business currently. That's a rarity that is unfortunately almost impossible to find, but it's our job as impact investors to say, who are the best CEOs in the world? How do we uncouth them? And then separately, for us, it's a massive bonus if they happen to be diverse.
Right. And I wanted to get into this, women in your industry, not enough. Still not enough, but growing, and it's great to see you and your partner running this firm.
Thank you.
But how do we get more women into venture capital? Is it something we need to be teaching them about in high school? Is it just creating those pathways? What do you think we need to do?
Well, I used to be a journalist like Caleb, so we call that a leading question, and I appreciate it, and I softball. My side hustle, I started a group called Transact Global in 2017 with 2 friends of mine who also happened to be emerging fund managers. We saw that there was a lack of information, an information gap, if you will, for specifically EMs who didn't come from traditional PE or VC firms. And you might say, well, why do they need information specifically? And the answer is because spin-outs, as we're called, haven't historically been women. We weren't invited to the club. I'm not poo-pooing it or crying about it. I'm just saying it just wasn't the case. 10 years ago, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Kirsten Green of Forerunner, for instance, starting her own firm. Now, thankfully, it's commonplace. So we started Transact Global with an abundance mentality to bring together the world's best fund managers who happen to be women. We're over 400 now, a wait list of well over 1,000. Work with funds in Kenya, in Australia, in China, in Canada, in Mexico, you name it. And we get together for conversations around LP fundraising. We get together for conversations about crypto and Web3 investing. And then together, we are co-investing in really exciting and innovative new companies. So one of my most recent investments, Great Wrap, which is a biomaterials company out of Australia, uses crushed potatoes to make biodegradable cling wrap. We led that investment and brought in 3 members of Transact to join us on the cap table. That, I think, is how you bring more women, to answer your question specifically, into the conversation.
Yeah, you open the tent.
Open the
And
tent.
you give them a real seat at the table instead of just, here's some money, do your best.
And you make sure it's not adverse selection. You know, I say, this is one of my best deals. Would you like to join me? I have been very fortunate in my career to have very powerful men offer me opportunities to invest in their startups. That's how I got my start as an operator transitioning into VC. Some of my male peers said, Soraya, would you like access to my exceptional company? And I'm very grateful for that. But now it's time for women to do the same for women.
Yeah, access is everything. So let's get into your path. You were a journalist, but you were also a product manager. You worked on an app developer. You actually created an app and sold it, I believe. What was your path really from, let's talk college, to where you are now and the steps that you made that put you in the right position to do what you're doing today?
Okay, I went to college at Georgetown University, and I worked as an intern for the WashingtonPost.com. I wrote my college admissions application on how I wanted to be Diane Sawyer, but my interest was always tech. A lot of the journalists would pull me aside and say, hey, you're a digital native. What's this RSS thing? And it turned into a gig that I repeated at Condé Nast when they acquired Reddit. So I was fortunate enough to work on Reddit post that very small acquisition. The company's going to go public at a multi-billion-dollar valuation. And then from my experience at Reddit, was asked to join the New York Times to be their first manager of digital partnerships and social media. I was 23. That led to a lot of media exposure, some of which I was prepared for, some of which I was not. I was not prepared to go on TV and be on the cover of magazines, but that mass media exposure invited me into really interesting opportunities like angel investing in my peers. Some of the companies that asked for early advice included a company called Squirrel, which became Square, and a company called Twitter. I was beta testers of these businesses as they were first burgeoning. Through these relationships, I was invited ultimately onto cap tables of very exciting companies that we call unicorns now. That simply means, as you well know, a valuation over $1 billion. After you have a few unicorns under your belt, traditional VCs say, come, hey, work for me. So during this time, I was also building startups. One still exists, has great valuation. One completely failed, and one sold twice. The one that sold twice, I was a co-founder of Apple and Wired's App of the Year. When you have some successes and some failures, the VC firms say, come join us, but the offers weren't interesting. They were junior roles in the firm, and I wanted to be a decision maker. So I just decided to go out and raise my own fund with my business partner, Marina. She had taken a mobility business public called Dorian LPG with her family. It's a maritime company. And post-IPO, they started a family office. She and I would co-invest together with our own capital, took all of that early risk into our first fund, which is performing very, very well. That fund has 3 unicorns currently. And we decided to institutionalize after that with our second fund and now our third.
Pretty good, but that's a lot of risk-taking, right? That's a lot of you saying, I could go down this road, but it's going to be a lot more interesting and maybe a lot more upside if I go at it alone. Not everybody's willing to do that.
I will say that when I left the New York Times to join my first startup, my parents were terrified. My mother's a professor. My dad is a blue-collar cab driver. Now he's retired. And they wanted me to use the wealth that I had accumulated from that first job and then later the startup that sold to buy a New York City apartment. And I didn't. I invested 100% of that capital into startups. That's a risk that I was willing to own because I happened to have some early success in my mid-20s. Not everyone has that opportunity. And I think the older you get, and now I'm a parent, and I have mortgage, and I have lots of important things to think about, I will say that there are days where I gut check myself before I say to a startup founder, I'm all in. But, there's a luxury that comes with youth and naivete.
All right, let's get into some misses.
Okay.
We're going to do a little quick lightning round here. We got about 10 minutes to go. You've had a lot of success. You've had a lot of wins. What are your biggest misses? What are your biggest whiffs, so to speak?
There's one top of mind. I was just texting him a thank you because he retweeted me that I'm speaking today at Future Proof. But Matthew Prince of Cloudflare was kind enough to let me invest in Cloudflare along the way. And ultimately, I did pre-IPO, but I wish I had much, much sooner. Certainly, they've done well post-IPO. I always regret when the co-founder of Square, who's now an LP in my fund, hello Randy, when he asked me to give Square advice on the iPod Touch, remember that? He asked me to beta beta test Square on the iPod Touch, and he was the first person to ever hand me advisory docs. I didn't know what to do with them. So a lot of these misses, I don't blame myself for, because I did not have a lawyer at the time. I did not have the vernacular that we talk about with Transact Global. The education is the missing gap in all of this. But if we start to teach not just economics, but Finance 101 to students across the board as early as elementary school in not a transactional and sort of icky way, but in a accessible way, because we all operate in this country as capitalists, whether we like it or not. I think the more opportunities will arise for people who were in my position 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, you can't help but miss some deals, and it looks like you had a little action in that, but I'm sure that there are other opportunities.
I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you're doing just fine. And I wish there was a website that taught finance and investing education.
Oh, is it called Investopedia?
Whoa. Let's get to that later.
Okay.
Pilot fish, people you admire, people you like to trail behind, watch what they're doing, who see around corners, who's out there that's sort of on your list.
So we're TMV to almost 90% of the folks that we work with, founders and LPs, but we're called Trail Mix Ventures because we invest in trailblazers. And I'd say one of the earliest trailblazers I looked up to was Kirsten Green of Forerunner, one of the first women VCs to manage $1 billion. Mary Meeker followed very shortly after with Bond. But, again, people who have done what I'm trying to do a little bit before me and have had tremendous success. I look up to the classic VC firms that outperformed during the last recession, like Union Square Ventures. They were early investors in Twitter and Tumblr and a lot of the companies that I used prolifically in that era. And they took some big, big risks when everybody was running away from the venture asset class and, of course, outperformed 10 times over. I like their thought leadership, and I like how committed they are to climate tech in particular. So those are two examples of VC firms in my industry that I co-invest with. I've been on a board with each, and that I enjoy sharing deals with.
Yeah, I think Fred Wilson is a pilot fish to a lot of people here.
Yeah.
It's a name you hear a lot when people talk about giants in the industry.
But also Rebecca Caden and Albert Wegner, the entire team is really exceptional.
Yeah, very good pilot fish to swim behind.
Yeah.
So we talked about your path and the things you learned along the way, but if you were now talking to yourself 10 years ago, given the knowledge that you have, what would you tell yourself?
So back when I was a founder, there was only one piece of literature online that you'd read if you wanted to figure out how to compile a cap table. It's called the Venture Hacks Bible. I would have told myself, as I was learning about fund management, to write the Venture Hacks Bible for fund managers, because I really think the more we democratize this industry and create technology platforms, I invest in a few of them, invested in one recently with Barry's firm, but the more that we make this accessible to all, the more that we will all win together. So I would have told myself to publish more, and I would have told myself to continue to invest in what I know. The times that I've deviated from what I know and tried to catch up with crypto, for instance, I've lost.
Yeah, I think we've all had those experiences too, but valuable lessons along the way. And again, you said it earlier, stick to what you're good at and become really, really good at that.
Exactly.
Instead of swinging outside of your lane. So again, now for the advisors out there who are trying to learn about your industry, what's the best way for them to sort of access it if they want to understand it as a place to potentially put capital for their clients or just to gain better experience in their profession?
I'd say, first and foremost, have a listening tour with, and we're not hard to find, 10 to 20 VC managers that you think highly of that are either publishing content that you read and enjoy or are matching to the interests of your clients. I'd say the second thing after the listening tour is to start with small bets and start to allocate capital, because I'm an LP in 4 funds. I've learned the most just from putting my money where my mouth is and getting those investor updates and following a fund over a 10-year cycle. And I'd also encourage folks to not necessarily be too attuned to the wind of the public market volatility and pulling back because we're all unsure of where things are headed. Venture is a 10 to 12-year lockup. That's good news for all of us who invest. It's a slower asset class to mature, but again, traditionally, especially small funds, sub 100 million, we have outsized returns. And so if you're looking for, in some ways, a safer bet for your clients, you should be thinking about early stage allocation.
Yeah, but it's that patience that you have to have, and
Yes.
sometimes that's not so easy to explain to a client. So we talked a little bit about this at the top in terms of the temperature. I'm going to have you give us a hot take. We know that we could be headed into, or we might be in, or we just came out of a recession. There's a downturn there. Hot take for you, looking out 1 year from now. I know the spaces you're in, we talked about some of those, but what do you think is going to be a differentiator a year from now as we look back on the year that's been?
I think there's a little bit of a Chicken Little happening. I mean, of course, with interest rates rising and valuations coming down to earth, which I think is a good thing, and the pullback happening in every stage. A recession is inevitable. There's some CIOs that I follow. I really like Mike Wilson at Morgan Stanley, for instance, and what he publishes, and I listen in on those conference calls. So I'd start by saying, pick the CIOs or the innovation futurists whom you most align with, not just from a value standpoint, but in terms of their track record. How many times have they been right before? And follow maybe one piece of guidance, but ignore all of the noise, because the noise can be quite deafening, and the noise can be quite confusing. But I think we're headed into one, like many people, I think we're headed into one in Q1 next year. And it's something that we should all brace ourselves for, but I don't think it'll be the world's largest recession. I think it'll be a slow burn where things start to trickle up slowly but surely. And with that in mind, again, I'm going to repeat what I said a second ago, it's a good time to be thinking about investing that will have long-term returns, but not necessarily be as subjected to that immediate volatility.
Right. And is there, I get this feeling, because I feel it in the public markets, a lot of dried up powder waiting to be deployed. There was a lot of success in the last few years, especially in the last 5 to 10 years in the venture world. Is there a lot of money, not just in your firm, but that you feel on the sidelines ready to go?
Massive amounts of institutional capital ready to go. And also these acquisitions are starting to happen. IPO is still frozen for my industry, but we're seeing a lot of M&A activity. What we're seeing actually that's really interesting, that's good for my portfolio, is that now that, and I hate to call them out, it feels mean, but the Zooms of the world were so overvalued, you're seeing a lot of executives at these tech companies, for instance, that did go public during COVID and traded on those excessive multiples. You're seeing the folks that are still tied up with equity leaving those big tech companies, those blue chip firms, and trying to get into early stage startups because they see more upside potential by being at something from its burgeoning earliest. That's great for my portfolio. It means that we can attract excellent talent. It means that we can recruit where we couldn't recruit before. And so there's some of this reckoning that's happening that's actually really good for the markets. We just can't see it for about 5 years.
And that institutional money, I get a lot of that's U.S. based, but you're probably feeling it from around the world. Any particular regions where you feel like money is ready to go as soon as somebody's ready to, with the next great idea?
We're seeing a lot of new LPs emerge from LATAM, and in particular, they care a lot about our tech-enabled sustainable solutions book. They really like our biomaterials companies, for instance. On the mobility and supply chain side, we have a lot of investors coming in from Greece and Singapore. It's an archaic industry, and I say that with love because my business partner comes from it. But it's an industry that still operates with fax machines and telegram memos, quite honestly, on ships. And so the innovation that we're investing in, data loggers that sit on the bridge of a ship that help you reduce the carbon emissions you put into the air because there's less fuel used on the water, that's actually tremendous for the environment. And we're seeing a lot of new investors come to us from port towns, Singapore, from Athens, who are very excited about this sort of niche opportunity, but they understand it as domain experts. And then I'd say that in North America, folks are more accustomed to venture capital. They've been exposed. But going back to what I said a second ago, with this great wealth transfer happening, a surprising number of women and next-gen investors have started investing in our fund. Not exclusively women, but quite a few of them are finding us because they feel as though our literature and our values are quite aligned to what they're looking for.
If there's anybody out here that wants to invest in your fund, come talk to you directly, hit you up on email.
Thank you for the
find you
sell.
on the socials. I take my usual commission on that. Let's go out on this. You seem to be a pretty voracious reader and taker in of information.
Yes.
What's the best thing you've read lately that you want to recommend to the crowd out here?
Oh, gosh. Think Like a Rocket Scientist is a great book, just about applying the principles of NASA rocket scientists to your everyday leadership. Always like to plug my LP, Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton. He's the highest rated professor in business in America, and he's written some great books, like Give and Take was one of my favorite pieces of literature. I try to apply that mentality and give more than I take, which is not all the book's about, but if I could summarize it into one line, I will. I recently reread Ray Dalio's Principles. It's hard to get through. It's sort of like thinking fast and slow.
It's a good watch, though. The animation is very good.
It's a great Blinkist, but it's a hard book to get through in one sitting. But the essence of the book is really fundamental to how I'd like to be running our firm.
Great advice, great conversation. Sarai Darabi, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you for being here. And thanks to the folks at Future Proof.